Hi Year 11, so it's Mrs Shanahan here. So just looking at some 6-mark questions ready for paper 2, which is on the 9th of June. And I've chosen this one here. It's quite a common sort of thread really to be asked either about the carbon cycle or the nitrogen cycle as well. Water cycle is on there. You might get asked a little bit about that. That's more changes of state really, the water cycle. So I thought this was quite a good one. People get mixed up between biotic and abiotic. So we can tackle that and talk about the carbon cycle. So the question says, describe how carbon is cycled through biotic and abiotic components of an ecosystem. And that is worth 6 marks. And as you probably have all worked out now, the thing with biology, everybody thinks it's dead straightforward, it's the easiest. But there's quite a lot of wording that is required, and you can be blindsided with, the way that they write the question. So we've kind of got to get smart, tackle these questions in the best way that we can, and think about what the examiner is looking for. So if I was, going through this with my class and I was doing sort of a brief description of the carbon cycle, you'll realise very quickly I'm an absolutely dreadful drawer. But anyway, wait until you see me animal that we're going to have in a minute. Oh, crikey, what's that going to be? Right, well, at least it's happy. Is it a pig? Is it a cow? Who knows? And then a power station, it's obviously not to scale, but you get the idea of all the different parts that we're going to be talking about. That's carbon dioxide. So first of all, anything to do with the carbon cycle, we'll tackle this in a minute. The only process which can remove carbon from the atmosphere is photosynthesis. So carbon will be taken out of the atmosphere by photosynthesis. And that is because obviously carbon dioxide is a raw material for photosynthesis, and plants, trees, algae will absorb it. Plants, and obviously that only happens during daylight hours. Because plants are living, all living things respire all of the time. So plants and trees will put carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere when respiration occurs, because respiration is a product, carbon dioxide is a product of respiration. This process here with my really amazing drawing, this is feeding. So this is when an animal, so a herbivore, is feeding on plants and trees. What happens is the carbon from the plant or the tree, through feeding and so in ingesting food, the plant carbon will become part of the animal carbon. And also because animals are living, yeah, you've guessed it, they are respiring and releasing carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere. And these are all biotic factors because they all involve living factors, which is what's happening. The abiotic, so abiotic means non-living, and this is where the really amazing power station that I've drawn here is going to be sort of spoken about. So in power stations, burning any sort of fossil fuels, coal, oil and gas, so the combustion of a fuel releases carbon dioxide. So combustion, which is just a posh word for burning, releases carbon dioxide. And in an exam, you should write the word out in full rather than doing the symbol really. So it releases carbon dioxide. Now, sadly, trees die and animals die. And when things die, they decompose, which means they break down. So they decompose. Now, bacteria carry out decomposition. Bacteria are living. And there we go again. So bacteria will respire and release carbon dioxide back into the air. So this here is all biotic factors, and the combustion of fossil fuels and decomposition are your abiotic factors. So how would we write that down for a 6-mark question? So first of all, I would always start by saying that when plants photosynthesize, they take in carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. So let's do biotic components first. So biotic means living factors. So when plants photosynthesize or carry out photosynthesis, Now you can say they take in or they absorb. So they absorb is a better word. They absorb carbon dioxide gas from the air or the atmosphere. And you'll have talked in class with your teacher that the gas is absorbed through stomata. These are the tiny holes on the underside of leaves. So when plants photosynthesize, they absorb carbon dioxide gas from the air. So that is carbon being taken from the air, and it can be locked up. If you think about trees, the carbon can be locked up in trees for hundreds of years until it gets chopped down. So absorb carbon dioxide gas from the air. Now, don't forget that when they respire, so it could be plants, it could be trees, it's anything that can photosynthesize. When plants and trees respire, they release carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere. Plants will store carbon compounds as well. So, for example, as glucose. So, plants store carbon compounds. So, for example, glucose. Now, glucose is C6H12O6, which basically means 6 carbon, so 12 hydrogen atoms and 6 oxygen atoms in one molecule of glucose. So there's your carbon. So we've mentioned it is taken in from through photosynthesis. When plants and trees respire, they release carbon dioxide. So this is it being cycled, and then it's stored in carbon compounds, for example, glucose, starch, which again is a carbohydrate, proteins as well will have carbon compounds in them. So that's plants. Let's talk about animals. So there's quite a lot here to write down. You might have thought at first there's nothing to write, but there's actually loads. So animals release carbon dioxide when they respire. So animals release carbon dioxide when they respire. Animals ingest carbon compounds through feeding. So animals ingest carbon compounds through feeding. And obviously you'll remember my amazing diagram up here, just reminding you of that. What else do we want to say? Okay, so now let's talk about abiotic factors now. So abiotic means non-living. And we said that that is decomposers. So decomposers, which will break down anything that is dead, any sort of organic matter, so dead trees, dead animals. And they release, so decomposers release carbon dioxide when they respire. So that's going back into the atmosphere. And we talked about burning fossil fuels when we mentioned the power stations before. So combustion, I really need to think about how much I'm writing here. I'm losing space. So combustion of fossil fuels. And remember that's your coal, oil and gas, or wood, any fuel that contains carbon. When you burn it, it will release carbon dioxide. So combustion of fossil fuels also releases carbon dioxide back into the air. So remember, this question was asking us about how carbon is cycled through biotic, living factors, and abiotic, non-living factors. So we talked about in plants, photosynthesis and respiration. And then we talked about in animals, respiration, and when they feed, and the carbon compounds move from the plant to the animal. And then you've got your abiotic factors. So decomposers, because they're now feeding on dead material, that's why that's abiotic. And they release carbon dioxide when they respire and break down dead leaves. So if you think about October, and all the leaves fall off the trees and then we think, where have they all gone? And of course decomposers are breaking them down. And combustion of fossil fuels will also release carbon dioxide into the air. There are other things, but I've run out of room, but I'll tell them you anyway. So oceans absorb carbon dioxide. Carbon is stored in carbonate rocks. If you think of things like limestone, which is calcium carbonate. And when rocks erode, they release carbon dioxide. And volcanoes also release carbon dioxide. So you've got a few extras that you can add on the bottom there. So oceans absorb, probably got room for that one. Oceans absorb carbon dioxide gas. And like I said before, it can be stored in rocks. So you've got absolutely loads there to write for that 6-mark question. So if you get anything similar, hopefully you've listened to this and you can write a really good answer. Okay, right. Good luck, guys. Thank you. See you later.